As a kid, a certain collection of images stuck in my brain when I was at my grandparents' lake house in Arkansas. And that was of the alleged manhunt of the so-called cop-killing cop. Although even as a kid, I always wondered, why would they show this guy who was allegedly a police officer repeatedly in military fatigues, who was allegedly named Christopher Dorner. Of course, now as an adult, I imagine that this story is entirely fake. And that's just because there's so many angles that are absolutely perfect for a narrative. But one of the things that, a particular narrative, but one of the things that really stuck out, or one of the things that this situation highlighted, was the vilification of military and veterans. I saw that when I was a child, and I always thought, oh, that could be possibly one of my brothers or somebody that I might know, because my brothers are in the military. And then later, it could be me. Of course, now I think, oh, that whole story was completely fake, and so they wouldn't put anyone real up there who could be confirmed. They would simply make up a character and have that character beaten in a fictional story setting. But one of the things that this situation does is it also highlights what looks to be similar to a slave hunt, which perfectly assists in the driving the division between skin color of black versus white, or white versus black, and essentially that whatever your skin color is, that's what's important, and that helps to pit people against each other over physical characteristics rather than content of character or criminal actions or anything like that. It's all about what you look like or where you're born. Of course, another thing that it also does is it highlights a conflict between the alleged law enforcement and veterans or the military. So basically, it's sanctifying the police while vilifying veterans and military, which ultimately would be set up as a scapegoat, making it easier. What's the military, of course, is set up as a scapegoat. It would make it easier for a United Nations intervention force to come in. And of course, those people would be almost indistinguishable from the so-called law enforcement. And thus, they could easily take over the country after first subverting everything and everyone. So basically, the idea is to vilify anyone who has courage and to set up as protectors of the citizenry specific so-called law enforcement elements. And let's look at why they do this. Across every level of society, we see so many images and repeated messages that demonize courage or courageous action, and instead set up as virtue obedience. These can be found in many places, but they are most present obviously in the organizations of the church, the school system, and so-called legal system, or the alleged government. One of the places that we can find an example, a very obvious example of this concept, can be found in the endless active shooter and emergency drills, which instill cowardice from a young age, where they teach you to run and hide and depend entirely and first on 911. You don't contact anyone else, you don't contact neighbors, you don't contact anyone but 911, and they teach this to children, and they replicate it in every level of society and every area of life, corporate, scholastic, governmental, doesn't matter. It's always repeated, the same message: run and hide. Don't fight back. And if you do fight back, it's only as a ultimate last resort, and you'll be directed basically on who to fight back against. And of course, when it comes to a fire, you're taught that the most secure protection is in a little lever that you find in a red box. If there is a fire, you don't go to it, you don't try and save anyone. Instead, you pull the alarm, run outside, and wait for the authorities. So it's basically the same idea as run and hide. Don't do anything. Don't be a hero. This is the same concept behind the hiding under a desk during a nuclear apocalypse that was taught to people around the 70s era, 70s, 80s, that time frame. And also, while I was in school, I remember we had tornado drills where we had to gather in the gymnasium and hold textbooks over our heads. That is a perfect example of instilling cowardice through repeated messaging and tactics and drills and whatnot. It is intentional, of course, because anyone would know that a textbook does not protect against a tornado and a desk does not protect against a bomb. Something that you also notice with these drills and emergency procedures is that they are always directing action, as if we were livestock. See, if a barn's on fire, you direct the livestock where to go and what to do. Livestock could possibly save itself from a burning barn, but it is the responsibility of the caretakers of that livestock to keep it safe. And that's what the purpose of all of these emergency action drills and preparedness drills is, because they do not treat us like independent people with capabilities or the ability to do anything. And if we did do stuff, they'd probably arrest us for engaging in unauthorized activity, something along those lines. But the direction of action is an obvious indicator that you're dealing with tyranny, because they could easily direct us, as many suspect with the FEMA camps and all this other stuff, and has been done before, is they establish the routine of directivity, directing action, and then they easily direct people to their own demise, and it would make it extremely easy to take over the United States with a UN intervention force when they direct everyone to go run and hide. And this particular element was surprisingly alive in the Marine Corps while I was there, if you can imagine that. Marines were being taught that if a active shooter came on base, and of course we had to drill this crap too, that our objective was to run and hide and call 911. Imagine trying to teach that to Marines, especially considering this idea of running and hiding is entirely contrary to the immediate action drills that they teach in the Marine Corps, which is that you move to contact. If somebody engages you or makes contact with whatever it is, you move to contact. So you turn into the direction of a problem. If there's a burning building, you go to the burning building. You do not run and hide or wait for authorities. And of course, there's probably a lot of veterans and Marines who have been arrested for doing this type of thing. And I remember also in the Marine Corps that corpsmen, I don't know if this is a rumor or legitimate, I couldn't confirm it, but I had heard that a corpsman had stopped on the side of the road to help with an accident and had saved somebody, and then was later arrested for doing that. So go figure. And then we have all of these slogans and repeated phrases that instill cowardice, such as "don't take the law into your own hands," which seems surprisingly contrary to the Constitution, which does not stipulate anything except that if people want to keep the Constitution, then they themselves have to uphold it And that's not through voting or anything else. That's directed action. It's not directed action because the Constitution doesn't direct action. It's a document that's supposed to be held up by the people. So the phrase "don't take the law into your own hands" is basically telling you, don't resist us as we come in to destroy and take over your country and make you subjects or submit to authority, as they always like to say. And somebody who is, quote, rebellious has a problem with authority. And of course, another thing that they like to repeat in the church is to wait for the wrath of God. Don't do anything. Maybe God is wanting you to be his wrath. That's possible. Nope, that's not repeated in the church. The church always repeats to sit around and wait. Wait for somebody else to do it. And then you also have with the QAnon movement, the constant repetition of trust the plan, which is repeated in a way that it becomes don't do anything, sit back, relax, and watch everything get destroyed, and don't do anything about it. Instead, let the police and all authorized authorities protect you for your safety. And this, of course, is all engaged and has the prospect or objective of turning everyone possible into submissive subjects. That is somebody who submits. And naturally, our ancestors would certainly be rolling in their graves, or turning in their graves, as the saying goes, if they could see how we have all become domesticated house pets for the banking state that we are currently ruled over by. That's because people are trained to be cowards and they don't do anything about it in general. There's the few people that do stuff about it are vilified, of course. And then you have the slogans of the police officers that say to protect and serve, but they don't say who. And of course, these are the so-called law enforcement entities. Of course, which law are they enforcing? That's one of the questions. And then, whom do they protect and serve? Naturally, the people that they protect and serve aren't the people. They are essentially security guards, and they protect and serve the mandates of their fraternal orders, which keep a leash on them and make sure that they fulfill their position. Now you might say, oh, the police are good because they rescue people. And they're always there on the scenes of accidents and everything with their bright lights and loud sirens. And that's because this is all about optics. It has to do with image. Everything is around image control. Because while you are watching the police rescuing somebody out of a burning car or whatnot on television, and while you see all their flashing lights and loud sounds and their uniforms and how they're plastered as heroes and sanctified everywhere, you won't, of course, be seeing them arresting the individuals that actually did all of the saving beforehand, before they came onto the scene. Because it's all about optics. It's all about looking like the hero, not being a hero, of course, but being an authoritative hero, one that is bestowed with authority, not one who has natural or inherent authority. And of course, the nature of police officers is easily found in the not too dissimilar police force of Cancun, which surprisingly looks, image-wise, a lot like all of the other police forces they find in the United States and around the world. And if all you have to do basically is look up headlines about Cancun and stories that go off around social media talking about bribery schemes and extortion and things like that. And of course, you'll have people in the United States that might look that up and say, oh, well, that doesn't happen here, while they are, of course, being served speeding tickets and court fines and all these other things. Now, when it comes to Antifa, while I saw a group, a local chapter of Antifa decide to formed themselves up around my hometown, the downtown of my hometown. Well, of course, I had been seeing all of the stuff about what Antifa had been doing, and when they formed up around, I figured, oh yeah, these people are not going to be different. They're just going to be the same type of problem. Authoritarian dictators running around and doing the biddings of overlords that are cowards and wouldn't do anything for them. So I decided to see how they operated, and I went down there and waved the Marine Corps flag, which is a big red one, in front of their faces, kind of like the bull, waving the red flag in front of the bull, the matador. And there was a street that divided us, so they were on one side of the street and I was on the other. And the women came over to confront us, while the skinny, feminine men stayed over on the other side of the street. And most of the women were overweight. So that tells you instantly how their tactics work. They are also cowards. They will not face anything directly, just like police and so-called law enforcement are also cowards. They always have to bring, whenever there's a problem, they always have to surround their one-person subject. And so they bring a lot of people against one person, as I've seen done many times. So yeah, they're just basically all cowards. Ironically, the prisoner of war missing in action flag, or PALMIA, has become associated with the thin blue line, which is ironic because we've all become prisoners of war under the police forces, which have been set up to do corporate bidding to protect and serve the interests of the corrupt, and to fleece us with all of these different fines, parking tickets, speeding tickets, to enforce all of the different regulations, to enforce the laws of the UN and not the Constitution, because the people that are supposed to enforce the Constitution are the people. But when all the people are trained to be cowards, well, then you're never going to have any legitimate law enforcement, because the people have to do it. Now, when I was in school, I realized a lot of things earlier on, and one of those is that the faculty is out to get you if you're different, or if you challenge them, or anything else. If you're, quote, rebellious, then they're out to get you because you're not being submissive. And when it came to being challenged by other students, they were usually not doing this of their own accord. They were set up to do it. And you could never directly confront a problem, because if you did so, the faculty would be immediately there to pounce. They would obviously goad a reaction by managing the other students against you. And then once you tried to fight back, well, then they would get you for bullying. And so there was this kid when I was in school who decided to put hot sauce in my mashed potatoes. Now, at lunchtime. Now, if he had done it in a more private setting, I probably wouldn't have done anything, because who cares? But he didn't. The kid did it in a public setting, which naturally was an open challenge, because all of the other kids were around watching. And that meant that if you did not respond to that provocation, then all of the other kids would take it as a sign of weakness and start picking at you. As most people know, that's how school goes. This is the type of situation that is set up by the faculty, the police officers, shall we say, of the school system, the law enforcement of the school. So I knew I had to respond to it, but I couldn't respond to it directly, otherwise I would get in trouble with faculty. So I chose to put glue on the particular student's seat when we were together in history class, because we did share that class together. And so I came early, as I usually do, and nobody else came early, not even the teacher. So I got Elmer's glue, and I chose Elmer's glue instead of super glue because of the white residue that it leaves behind, whereas super glue is clear. Naturally, I'm sure most can imagine the type of reaction that the other students had when they publicly saw this individual stand up and have a white print on their behind. The nicknames are, as you might expect, and I never had trouble with that kid ever again, nor anyone else in the school system, except for the faculty, because the faculty were always looking for a way to get me. And so I was always in and out of in-school suspension, but I always tried to make sure that the pretext was stupid and obvious to all of the other students that I was being persecuted. As I've showed in my other videos, the faculty are vicious individuals that are only interested in persecuting and abusing children and shaping them into submissive subjects so that when they become adults, they follow the laws. Which laws are those? It's not the Constitution that you're supposed to follow. That's the laws of the UN, and it's the laws of an oppressive occupation force which robs and steals from the people. And of course, you're also trained to submit to lawful authority, which the Constitution makes the lawful authority the people. So why is it that we're being dictated to in the name of the Constitution by the alleged lawful authorities of the Constitution? Because they're not. They're illegitimate pretenders. And they have to sustain this by imbuing cowardice at a young age through threat, force, and persecution and all these other things that the deplorable school faculty does. Now, I ran into other examples of this type of thing when it comes to dictators in different events in my life. And one of those is when I went to a gun show, and then I came into the theme of, strangely, overweight dictatorial or overweight petty dictators. There was this guy who was allegedly with the Trump team at the gun show, who had said that he had stopped smoking, and that was his excuse for being a butthead. And so I had bought a product that goes with a Glock, and he told me, mind you, told me, not suggested, as if I was his obedient employee or something, which I was not there working or volunteering with this group, so it was a really strange occurrence. And he told me to go return that and get something that formed with a 6 Sauer, because there's nothing better than a 6 Sauer pistol. And naturally I knew that arguing with this person was a waste of time, but it was obvious that he thought he was a master of everyone, and he was of course a master of no one. But one of the things that he did tell me, to my face, mind you, even after I told him that I had been in the Marine Corps, is that George Bush had removed the issue of people not being able to carry firearms on bases. Military personnel not being allowed to carry firearms on bases, mind you. And that, of course, was not true, because I had been in the Marine Corps under Obama, which came after George Bush, of course. And so this guy was, not only was he lying, but he was just, being a bully, the usual thing, just being aggressive and overly belligerent about everything. But it was a theme that was to replicate itself in other areas, especially when it came to the alleged Trump team, which seemed more like a bunch of fat mafiosos thought themselves superior to everyone else. And when I did volunteering with this, with different political groups, the Trump team and all that, after one of the volunteering events, which ended up working for one of the other people running for other offices in Republican race, which is interesting because if it's a Trump team, but they were leveraging volunteers to do other things with people that you might not agree with. So that regardless, they had a little after hours hiring event that went on at a restaurant bar. So let's go ahead and look at the characters that were the employed members of this Trump team, allegedly, because they could easily have been operating in the name, but not in the spirit of such a group, meaning fraud, basically. One of them was a lawyer who said that it was his dream to go to Washington, D.C. That's interesting. And told me that he would have a job for me later. Super vague. And then there was a lady who seemed to have virtually no personality. And then there was this overweight guy again, who was extremely belligerent, loud, and aggressive. He was very overweight, definitely obese. And his claim to fame was that he worked in Kasich's office, which is ironic because allegedly Kasich was not a fan of Trump. So this is a guy on the Trump team. Yeah, okay. And then the lady said that it was the objective of the young individuals. Of course, I was around the age of the other three, and the younger people were, teenager age or young adult, like 20s, something like that. Actually, I was 24. But she said that it was our job to flush out Trump supporters. That sounds rather sinister when you put it like that. And then the overweight guy, he got mad at me later on in the night and called me a Nazi for talking about Prussia, because I had mentioned something about Prussia. I don't remember how it came up in a conversation. And then he told me that we couldn't talk about that. And then I said, well, why can't we talk about that? And he freaked out and called me a Nazi. So that was an interesting exchange that happened there at that restaurant bar. Now, in Rupert Sheldrick, The President of the Past, Morphic Resonance and the Habits of the Future, text copyright 1988, and renewed 2011 with Rupert Sheldrick. This book gives us a good explanation of just how the teaching cowardice works and what is the basis of it. In the section where it talks about studies with identical twins, it states, the relative importance of nature and nurture, or heredity and environment, is not only a scientific but also a political question. In fact, politics has overshadowed science in this area since the middle of the 19th century. That's an interesting date, mind you. For example, in England, the liberal philosopher John Stuart Mill, 1806-73, preached a gospel of social progress, whereby political and economic reforms can change human nature through changing the environment. Ideas that have strong influence on progressive politics. And of course, the nature that they're attempting to change is the nature of courage. They want to change courage, turn it into cowardice. Political movements like socialism and communism. On the other hand, Francis Galton, Charles Darwin's cousin, made a strong scientific case for the predominance of heredity. In his book Hereditary Genius, 1869, he argued that the prominence of Britain's most distinguished families depended more on nature than on nurture, and came to a controversial conclusion. Man's natural abilities are derived by inheritance, under exactly the same limitations as are the form and physical features of the whole organic world. Consequently, as it is easy, notwithstanding those limitations, to obtain by careful selection a permanent breed of dogs or horses gifted with peculiar powers of running, or of doing anything else, so it would be quite practicable to produce a highly gifted race of men by judicious marriages during several consecutive generations. Galton realized that the question of nature and nurture could be studied with the help of identical twins, who had a similar heredity constitution, while non-identical twins were no more similar than ordinary brothers and sisters. He found remarkable similarities between identical twins in a wide range of characteristics, including the onset of disease and even time of death, and his investigation of twins remains one of the classic studies in behavioral genetics. Notice, mind you, he states remains one of the classic studies. Galton proposed that the state should regulate the fertility of the population in such a way as to favor the improvement of human nature through selective breeding, for which he coined the name eugenics. The eugenics movement had a large influence in the United States and reached its apogee in Nazi Germany. Not surprisingly, Nazi scientists were very interested in twins. The notorious Joseph Mengele favorite project at the Auschwitz death camp was a study of identical twins who were kept in special barracks and treated better than any other prisoners. Mengele told one of his colleagues it would be a sin, a crime, not to utilize the possibilities that Auschwitz had for twin research. There would never be another chance like it. Then, of course, he was wrong, because Mengele was then imported to the United States under Operation Paperclip, so he could continue doing the same thing here. No surprise. And then in continuation, one consequence of Nazism is that eugenics in general and twin studies in particular were discredited for a generation. This left the field open for the environmental theories of the behaviorists, who strongly believed in the possibilities of social engineering through the conditioning of children. The founder of behaviorism, John B. Watson, claimed, "Suppose we were to take individual twins into the laboratory and begin rigidly to condition them from birth. To the 20th year along utterly different lines. We might even condition one of the children to grow up without language. Those of us who have spent years in the conditioning of children and animals cannot help but realize that the two end products would be as different as day is from night." After the Second World War, the leading figure in research in identical twins was a British educational psychologist, Sir Cyril Burt, who claimed to have studied 53 pairs who had been reared apart. Burt focused on the inheritance of intelligence as measured by IQ tests, and claimed that genetics had a far stronger influence than the environment. Unfortunately for genetic determinists, Burt was later shown to have faked some of his data, but despite the setback with the cracking of the genetic code and the growth of molecular biology in the 1960s, molecular genetics gained enormously in prestige and influence with the rise of sociobiology in the 1970s, and the popularization of neo-Darwinian ideas by Richard Dawkins in his book The Selfish Gene, 1974. Genetic determinism gained a predominant cultural influence that was reinforced by new studies of twins. The Minnesota Twin Family Study, the largest twin project in the world, was established in 1989. The Minnesota team found that there were high correlations between identical twins separated at birth for a variety of personality characteristics, such as a sense of well-being, social dominance, alienation, aggression, achievement and IQ. Their IQ results were almost identical to those that Cyril Burt was accused of fabricating. The Minnesota studies also revealed some very surprising biological similarities. For example, the Jim twins, who had both been called James by their adoptive families, who were separated soon after birth, showed extraordinary similarities in their life histories. Both lived on the only house in the block with a white bench around a back tree in the backyard. Both were interested in stock car racing. Both had elaborate workshops where they made miniature picnic tables or miniature rocking chairs. They also had parallel health histories, including a lazy eye and the same eye. Both experienced what they thought were heart attacks, though no disease was diagnosed, and both had vasectomies. Although, on the other hand, for that last note, I bet those vasectomies were not by their knowledge. Some pairs of twins also had similar fears and phobias. The Minnesota researchers concluded the diverse cultural agents of our society, in particular, most parents are less effective in imprinting, what's that word there? Imprinting their distinctive stamp on the children, developing within their spheres of influence, or less inclined to do so than has been supposed. And of course, that imprinting is done throughout the world by the school system, where the children are imprinted with the school system's ideology and everything else. And it's no surprise that the children grow up very in a very antagonistic setting to their parents. There have been many studies of pairs of twins who are not separated at birth, comparing monozygotic with dizygotic twins. For example, in a study in Virginia with 1,000 female twins, a wide range of behaviors like smoking, choice of careers or hobbies, and menstrual symptoms were much more similar with identical than fraternal twins, again suggesting a strong influence of heredity. Through twin studies, behavioral geneticists made a strong case that much of our identity is genetically determined. This belief, combined with the high prestige of molecular biology, contributed to the launching of the Human Genome Project and the biotechnology bubble that accompanied it. Morphic resonance provides a new way of looking at the data from studies of identical twins and could help to liberate this subject from the political controversies that have dogged it for so long. Because they are genetically identical, monozygotic twins are much more similar to each other than any other pairs of humans. Hence, morphic resonance between them will be exceptionally specific and stronger than that between any other pairs. Now, one of the things that he did in this book is he shows a link between the ideas of genetics and behavioral or environmental modification and how this has been approached. But this theme is further compounded on and explained in The Grace of Academe by Richard Mitchell, which covers the subject of how the school system engages in environment and behavioral modification with the emphasis of changing the nature of humans to be more malleable and useful. It states, quote, "You have surely heard of child-centered education, that process that will educate the whole child. It sounds so decent. What could be better than centering on the child, the whole child, no less? But what, exactly, do half-baked neo-Wundians mean when they speak of child-centered education? Here is an article that provides some evidence toward an answer to that question. The non-redundant interactive relationship of perceived teacher directiveness and student personological variables to grades and satisfaction. Recent research has shown that a number of student variables, authoritarianism, dogmatism, intelligence, conceptual level, convergent, divergent ability, locus of control, anxiety, compulsivity, need for achievement, achievement orientation, independence, dependence, and extroversion, introversion, may moderate the relationship between teacher directiveness and grades and satisfaction. There is a fair degree of moderate intercorrelation among these student variables, and such intercorrelation suggests that some of the found interactive relationships may be overlapping or redundant. The purpose of the present research is to develop multivariate mathematical models of the interactive relationships using stepwise regression strategies. Such models should facilitate a more parsimonious interpretation of the interactive relationships, which are ... We are going to show you all of that mess and even give you the name and address of the chappie who made it. But we can't. Before our typesetter was able to finish, a member of our staff borrowed the original and only copy and took it to Texas. There, while fumbling for his entry permit at the Immigration Control Office, he lost the evidence. Maybe it's just as well. There's no telling what those rangers might have done had they caught him with a smoking dissertation abstract. They don't cotton much to that kind of stuff down there. We can tell you, at least, that the original copy came from Calgary, Alberta. And we have to hope, if justice is ever to be done, that the Mounties don't want any of this stuff in their country either. They shouldn't have had much trouble getting their man and his sidekick in this case. The author and his dissertation advisor were so proud of themselves that they had their photographs printed right on the page with the evidence. Perfectly decent and respectable young fellows they seemed to. Who would have thought it? Since personology must be too subtle a science for the likes of us, we cannot explain how personological variables might be different from differences in persons. We would guess, though, that student variables are young variables studying to become teacher variables. And we're a little disappointed by the list of student variables, a measly 12 items, in the better teacher academies. You'd never get a doctorate for such a skimpy or parsimonious elaboration of the obvious commingled with the incomprehensible. The most instructive thing about the passage is that its pretentiousness is eloquently, although inadvertently, undone by its timidity. Notice that all these nifty variables may moderate the relationship. Educationists won't take chances even on the obvious and simple. After all, how can we be sure without multivariate mathematical models of the interactive relationships that different people feel different about different things? Of course, should this research achieve its goal, we might have to change our opinion. A parsimonious interpretation of a fair degree of moderate intercorrelation is not to be sneezed at. Before such an awesome discovery, we just have to back off, treading cautiously in our best stepwise regression strategies. Let's try to imagine some possible facts and events that might incite such an undertaking, that is, the development of multivariate mathematical models of interactive relationships. First, be careful to remember something that might easily blow away in the storm of jargon. All of this has something to do with children in school. So we can imagine there are some children in school. They are, in some ways, different from each other. That is, they have, could that be the right word, different student variables. They get grades in school, probably some good, some bad, some different, or indifferent. They are, or are not, as the case may be, satisfied either by school or by their grades, or by both in various degrees. They perceive, or not, maybe, something called teacher directiveness. How can these things be seen as functions of one another? Before we can begin this research, we have to be clear about some things that might confuse mere laymen. Notice first that whether a teacher actually is directive or is not an issue. All that matters is whether a student perceives a teacher as directive. This is child-centered research. Although grades do go into the hopper, it's not because we are interested in what a student has learned or how that can be measured, but because we want to know about the student's satisfaction, which depends only in part on his grade, which must be factored in with his own perception of directiveness of his own student variables. This is child-centered research. Bearing in mind those warnings, we can now proceed with our research. If we are successful, we can expect to be able to answer questions like this. Who will be more satisfied with a B+? A moderately intelligent student with better than average convergent-divergent ability, but little of any locus of control, or a very bright dogmatic student who shows a normal achievement orientation but no compulsivity to speak of and does not, unlike the first student, perceive the teacher as directive. You can devise other such examples for yourself. The possibilities are probably infinite. None of them, however, will have any objective meaning, which would require precise numerical evaluation of hosts of human traits, beliefs, attitudes, prejudices, and emotions. In fact, that kind of study must end exactly where it begins, in a vague generalization. You and I, if asked and forced to answer, could also have said that there may be a fair degree of moderate intercorrelation between a person's characteristic traits and the way he feels about things. This is a kind of revelation that educationistic research provides. Of course, as a note, with this example from this book, the child-centered research that they're talking about clearly correlates to what the other book was talking about, which is environment control and behavioral modification through environment control and environmental modification. So you want, what all of this is trying to do, of course, is to change the nature of humans through controlling and modifying the environment. That's child-centered research. It's not actually built to benefit the child. None of the systems that we have when it comes to children is built to benefit the children. They're all built around that singular concept, which is behavior modification through environment modification. And naturally, the environment modification can be easily found in the ugly and oppressive buildings of the embassies and consulates around the world. Of course, it's not just them. But when it comes to the embassies and consulates, it was rather interesting when I went to the Mexico City consulate, and I, as a U.S. citizen, was not allowed to enter the consulate by security guards that were not U.S. citizens, they were locals. And this theme was replicated at the embassy in Quito, Ecuador, where I, a U.S. citizen, was barred from entering the embassy, allegedly for U.S. citizens, by security guards that were not U.S. citizens and were in fact locals. And this same theme played out when I went to go get my daughter's paperwork to become a U.S. citizen. When I went inside, everything was made by and for foreigners. There were no U.S. citizens at all, whatsoever, anywhere. And I, as a U.S. citizen, just for the simple act of getting paperwork for my daughter, was treated like a criminal, berated and questioned by people that weren't U.S. citizens to get the paperwork for U.S. citizenship, of which I am one and have been my entire life. So I hope that No U.S. citizens overseas ever get in trouble, because they can certainly not turn to any of the embassies or consulate or other places that are allegedly in our name, because the people working there will probably just hand whoever comes in over to whoever might be pursuing them or what trouble they might be involved with. And clearly nobody in these places care anything for U.S. citizens or obeying the laws of the United States. Yeah, that doesn't seem like an embassy or consulate of the United States to me. More like a UN installation. And then we have more confirmation of this concept that the Constitution is designed by and for the people, but it is not being upheld because we have all had our behaviors modified in the environmental modification of child-centered research institutions. And in the Fifth Amendment, it states, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. Not a judge, a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Of course, the law that it's talking about here would be the Constitution, but that would, of course, be argued that it's not talking about the law of the Constitution, it's just talking about law in general, because that's the word game that's always played. But that argument doesn't hold water, considering other parts of the Constitution. But in continuation, all states, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's not public use for the juridic public. That's public use for the human public, mind you, because the juridic entity was not a concept that was recognized until the Fourth Amendment was instituted, or 14th Amendment, mind you. And in the 10th Amendment, it states the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. Now, notice those words. Not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. Not delegated to the people. The Constitution does not delegate. It does not direct. It does not mandate. And it does not enforce anything against the people. It enforces it against the United States by the Constitution. And then in continuation said, nor prohibit it by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So anything that is not highlighted in the Constitution, and most of the past amendments are contrary to the first parts of the Constitution, which is flying in the face of precedent, of course. But this 10th Amendment is basically stating that this document is made by and for the people, as is constantly repeated, and it is not enforced because the people don't enforce it. The people are the law enforcement. It is not the police, and it's not the sheriff. The people are. And the people have not been enforcing the Constitution, specifically against the police and the sheriffs and the judges and the fraudulent legislatures and the banks and the corporations and just everyone, basically. If you are part of the people, then you would support the Constitution, and if you're not, then you're an enemy of the Constitution, and naturally you're supposed to be an enemy of the military also. If, of course, you don't support the Constitution and obey it. In the Fourth Amendment, it states, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, a constitutional warrant, although it's not specified here, should be delivered from the presentment or indictment of a grand jury. And also it states that the judicial power, or in a different amendment, section 2, the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution. The laws of the United States and treaties made, or which shall be made under their authority, to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants or different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states' citizens or subjects. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed. But when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed. And there we get that note there about Congress directing. This, of course, would be a legitimate Congress, mind you. But the legitimate Congress, not the fraudulent Congresses that we have where we are dictated to about who we can vote for and who can enter and become a congressman. Because the only three things that are stipulated in the Constitution about who can become a congressman and who can run for office is that they be a citizen, they be a certain age, and they be resident for a certain amount of time. None of these, all of these other things and these fines and these fees and these licenses and all these other things that they put for becoming a congressman are legitimate for a constitutional Congress. That's because the Congresses that we have aren't constitutional. They are not legitimate. And so, if you have a legitimate Congress, then that legitimate Congress directs the place for a trial if it shouldn't have been committed in a state. So that's interesting. We get the Congress directing, and that is also replicated, or that theme is also replicated in another book where it talks about how the Congress directed and retained control over the judges and things like that. Now, a constitutional court would be set up similar to a tribunal, and that would be with the semicircle desks, or at least the straight line of desk, and that's where you would have the jury being addressed by the jurists, or what many would call the lawyers. The jury is addressed, and the jury takes the center stage, so to speak. The jury sits at the bench, not the judge. And this, of course, is replicated in the tribunal situations, except the tribunals have mostly judges sitting at them now. But if we look at other events in history, the tribunals were populist by people that might be janitors. They could be just about anyone. There was no specifications, except, well, some places had different specifications, but when it comes to the Constitution, it only has to do with age, residency, and citizenship. So a janitor who is of the age, of the residency, and of the citizenship could perfectly sit on a jury, and the jurors wield, at least in a constitutional setting, far more power than the judges do, who would sit off to the side. But now we have it reversed, where the judge is addressed and sits on the bench, and the jury is set to the side. And that is one way that you can tell that the courts we have today are definitely not constitutional. So they're acting in the name of the Constitution, but they're not. What we should have are instead constitutional tribunals. That's what a constitutional court would be. It would be a tribunal of people that are selected to carry out the justice of the Constitution, and the people have to enforce it. You cannot sit around and wait for the appropriate authorities, of which we've all been trained means the police and the sheriffs and all of them, to act, because the appropriate authorities in all matters of constitutionality, as has been and always will be, the people. Thank you. And if you have enjoyed this content, please like this video, share it, subscribe to my channels, and check out my other content. There will also be free books available, and in the future I might be doing other giveaways of different content that I have made.